The day has done all it needs to do. Now only stillness remains. Let your thoughts loosen, like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase, just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. It was always the silence of the house that came first, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that holds its breath. Evelyn had not meant to come back. Not really. Her father's funeral brought her to the town, yes, but the house, 3 stories of stone and gloom, stood like a memory she hadn't asked for. Yet when the solicitor handed her the keys with a nod that seemed like a warning more than a gesture, something old and strange tugged at her. She stepped inside that evening, just before twilight. Dust kissed the air as the door creaked open, the way it always had, announcing her arrival like a curtain pulled back on a forgotten play. The hall greeted her with its emptiness. The grandfather clock stood at the far end, stilled at 3:12, the minute hand slightly bent. No one had lived here in over a decade. She had left after her mother vanished, no trace, no explanation. One morning there was tea still warm in the cup, and her mother's favorite sweater folded neatly on the chair by the window. But the woman herself had dissolved into the house like breath in winter. Now, Evelyn wandered through familiar rooms turned unfamiliar by time. The floral wallpaper in the sitting room had curled like dried petals. Upstairs, the twin beds in the guest room still wore the quilts her grandmother stitched. Everything was in its place, but nothing felt settled. She didn't sleep that first night. The wind brushed the eaves and moaned down the chimney like someone exhaling a long-held secret. The hall light flickered once and went out. She lay in the guest bed, wrapped in layers of fabric that smelled of cedar and something less identifiable like dried leaves and old perfume. Then the footsteps began. Not hurried, not dragging, just deliberate, from one end of the hall to the other. Then silence. Then again. Evelyn sat up, holding still as the sound continued. The old wood creaked beneath each imagined step, and she remembered vividly the way her mother used to walk when checking on her as a child. The exact rhythm, heel-toe. A pause. Then again. But the footsteps never reached the room. She wanted to believe it was the house settling, the wind playing tricks, but it wasn't. There was a certainty in the steps, like someone remembering the path they once walked. Morning came reluctantly, with a gray light that seemed unsure if it should reveal what the night had hidden. Evelyn made coffee from a tin in the pantry that had somehow survived expiration. She stood in the kitchen, trying to ignore the feeling that someone had stood exactly where she was now, only moments ago. That afternoon, she walked through town, hoping the outside world might shake the strange feeling from her. The grocer still remembered her name. So did the librarian who mentioned her father had become quieter in his last years. Always talking to himself, she said, or to someone who wasn't there. Evelyn returned before dusk. The hall met her with its quiet breath. The air smelled faintly of lilac, her mother's perfume. She followed the scent up the staircase without understanding why. In her parents' bedroom, the curtains danced, though the windows were shut. On the bedside table, a thin notebook rested. She hadn't seen it before. The first page read only, "If I leave quietly, maybe I can return quietly too." Her hand trembled as she turned the page. The rest was blank. That night, the footsteps came again. But this time they paused outside her door. Evelyn did not open the door. She sat upright in the bed, every muscle alert beneath the quilt, her breath shallow and her thoughts slipping sideways. The silence outside was not complete. It felt like something had just stepped out of hearing. Not gone, just waiting. Minutes passed, or perhaps more. Then faintly the soft tap of retreating steps down the hallway. Then nothing. By morning, she convinced herself it must have been a dream, or at least something dreamlike, a fragment of memory stirred by the return to a house steeped in absence. She clung to that version because it was simpler than believing the alternative. But the notebook still sat on the knitstand, and the second page was no longer blank. Don't be afraid of the sound. I'm still finding my way. There was no signature, no smudge from a pen, just those 9 words in fine, familiar handwriting. Her mother's. Evelyn tried to tell herself she must have missed the message before, that in the haze of last night's unease, she'd only imagined the page was blank. But her heart knew better. She spent the day cleaning. It seemed like the most rational thing she could do, as if clearing cobwebs and scrubbing tiles could sweep away the sense of something watching from the corners. In the afternoon, she pulled old sheets off furniture, like lifting the veils from forgotten ghosts. She stopped when she reached the parlor. The piano sat in the corner, the ivory keys yellowed, 1 or 2 chipped. Her mother had loved to play Never for guests, just for the quiet of the house. As if on cue, her fingers touched a few notes. The melody was incomplete, but her hands moved with some long-lost muscle memory. Then she heard it, a soft hum, barely audible, as though someone were singing along from somewhere just out of sight. She froze. The air shifted, like a breeze inside a room with no open windows. That evening, Evelyn didn't sleep in the guest room. She moved into her old bedroom instead, the one with the faded blue curtains and the view of the back garden. The bed creaked with the weight of old years, but the room felt smaller, safer, like a box with known walls. She placed the notebook beside her pillow. At 3:12 a.m., as if summoned by the broken clock downstairs, Evelyn awoke. She wasn't sure what had stirred her, but the room had a fullness to it, as if she weren't alone. Then came the soft sound. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Not hers. It was so faint it could have been imagined, but it fell into rhythm beside her own. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Steady. Gentle. She didn't turn her head. She just lay there, eyes wide in the dark, and listened. When she dared to look, there was nothing there. No one. Just the outline of furniture and the curtain gently shifting as though someone had brushed past. The notebook now lay open again. You're braver than you think. I remember that. In the morning, she walked through the house with a quiet resolve. She opened every door, every drawer, as if inviting whatever memory or presence still lingered to show itself plainly. There was a strange comfort growing, not fear, but a tender kind of ache, like recognizing the scent of someone long gone in an old sweater. That afternoon, she walked down to the cellar. It had always frightened her as a child, though she never quite remembered why. The air was thick there, cooler. The walls sweated with time. In the far corner, covered by a draped tarp, she found something unexpected. A trunk. She hadn't seen it before. It wasn't her father's. Not that she remembered. She unlatched it carefully. Inside were photographs sepia-tinted and curled. Most featured her mother as a young woman, and many she had never seen. One caught her breath. It showed her mother standing in this very hallway, her hand on the banister, looking over her shoulder toward the camera. Except, in the shadows behind her, barely visible, was another figure. Undefined, like someone just out of focus. Behind the photo was a folded letter. Only the first line was legible through Evelyn's stunned eyes. If something follows me back, I'll try to guide it home. That night, she waited again. Not to confront whatever had come, but to understand it. The footsteps returned, softer now, like they too were remembering how to walk. Evelyn no longer reached for logic. Whatever was happening in the house didn't fit neatly into explanations. And maybe that was all right. Not everything asked to be understood. Some things only asked to be heard. The following morning arrived wrapped in stillness, the kind that feels like a breath being held. She woke early, before the sun, drawn not by sound this time, but by a feeling. A quiet pull, like an invitation. Downstairs, the house held its usual hush, but something had shifted. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. Not the acrid kind, but the earthy scent of burnt herbs, like incense long extinguished. She found no source, no trail of ash, just that lingering perfume of something that once was. She sat by the window with the notebook, now a strange thread tying past to present. On the next page, a new message had appeared overnight. There's more than one voice in the hall now. She read it again and again, the chill between her shoulder blades deepening. Until now she had hoped that if there was something lingering, it was her mother. A memory. A remnant. But this hinted at something else. Something older, maybe. Or simply mother. As the light brightened outside, she ventured to the attic. She hadn't been up there since childhood, when the pull-down ladder seemed impossibly steep. Dust clouded the narrow beam of her flashlight as she ascended, illuminating relics from other times. Trunks, chairs, cracked porcelain dolls, a box of broken ornaments. In one corner stood a mirror, full length with a mahogany frame carved in vines and leaves. She didn't recognize it. It certainly hadn't belonged to her family. It was too ornate, too theatrical. The glass was fogged with time, but as she stepped closer, she noticed something peculiar. Her reflection blinked before she did. Evelyn stepped back sharply, breath catching. The mirror now showed only her, perfectly in time, perfectly still. She backed away, turned quickly, and descended the ladder, not daring to look back until she'd reached the hall. That night she did not sleep. Instead, she waited by the stairs, wrapped in a shawl and silence. The clock downstairs remained frozen at 3:12. She had come to expect it, like the way you wait for thunder after lightning. And when the footsteps came, she followed. They moved down the hallway slowly, deliberately. She walked behind them, not seeing but sensing. With each step she took, the house seemed to breathe with her. The walls didn't creak, they sighed. The footsteps turned down the back hall, the one that led to the old study, a room long untouched. The door opened before she reached it. Inside, the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising off pavement, though the room was cold. The desk remained where her father had left it, but now atop the wood lay a scattering of torn pages letters. She realized all in her mother's hand, not addressed to anyone, just spoken thoughts, confessions. One read, "Sometimes I hear them too, not just echoes' voices, asking, waiting. I think they're lost in something that remembers more than we do." Evelyn gathered the pages, smoothing them gently. Each one felt like a thread of something tangled, left for her to follow. A soft knock sounded from the doorframe behind her. She turned. No one. Only the hallway. Empty. But on the floor just outside the study lay a small object, a silver locket. She picked it up. It clicked open easily, revealing two miniature photographs, one of her as a baby, the other of her mother, and etched into the metal beneath, "Find the quiet place." She didn't know what it meant yet, but something in her chest, some long-stilled knowing, began to stir. That night, she returned to her room with the locket and placed it beside the notebook. As she drifted into sleep, a whisper, not quite a voice, but not the wind, brushed past her ear. "You're not alone here." But you never were. The morning brought a softness that felt almost kind. Sunlight threaded through the blue curtains, catching dust in the air like drifting snow. Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed, locket in one hand, notebook in the other. She hadn't written, and it still didn't dare. It wasn't hers to write in, not really. She was only listening. Today the page was blank, but the message had already been delivered. You're not alone here, but you never were. She carried that thought with her as she moved through the house. It comforted her more than it unsettled. There was a difference, she realized, between haunting and presence. What lingered here, whatever it was, it hadn't tried to frighten her. It had tried to be known. In the late morning, she found herself in the garden. It was overgrown now, the brick path nearly erased by time and thistle. Her mother had once tended it with a quiet devotion. Lavender, rosemary, chamomile, all soft healing things. Near the broken sundial, she saw something odd. A stone, newly turned. Fresh earth. Curious, Evelyn knelt and brushed it aside. Beneath the surface was a small wooden box, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, a photograph. Faded, but familiar. Her mother and father, and someone else. A young woman, perhaps early 20s, in a pale dress with dark hair pinned high. She stood slightly behind them, but her eyes, deep-set and weary, stared straight into the camera. Not quite a part of the family, not quite separate. On the back of the photo, in delicate pencil, Margot, summer 1951. Evelyn frowned. She had never heard the name, never seen this woman before, but something about the eyes stirred a chill in her. Not fear, exactly, but recognition, like seeing someone who had appeared in a dream and left you wondering if they were real. She brought the photo inside and began searching the house. Old drawers, boxes in the linen closet, any mention of a Margot. In the library, she found a book that had been hollowed out. Tucked inside, a bundle of yellowing letters, none addressed to her father, all written by Margot. The first began plainly, "To whoever finds this, I didn't mean to stay, but I don't know the way out." The letters were dated over 2 years, spanning 1950 to 1952. Each one grew increasingly fractured, the handwriting shakier, the sentences disjointed. She read them one by one, sitting on the carpet like a child, listening to bedtime stories turn strange. One letter stood out. It read, "The footsteps started after your mother sang. She opened something without knowing. Now they follow the sound. Your mother." Evelyn's mother? She checked the date, June 1951. Her mother would have been 17 then. Still living here. Still unmarried. A possibility began to take root, unwelcome and irresistible. Was Margot someone her mother had known? A friend? A sister? A ghost? The idea pressed against Evelyn's mind like fingers through a veil. And just beneath the surface more questions. That night, the house didn't wait until 3:12. At midnight, a melody stirred. Soft, nearly inaudible, like the sound of someone humming down a long hallway. The same lullaby her mother used to sing while folding laundry. Evelyn followed it barefoot, drawn like a child to candlelight. The sound came from the parlor. There, seated at the piano, was a figure, translucent, pale, not frightening, just present. She didn't turn when Evelyn entered, just kept playing, hands hovering over keys that made no sound. And though the face was unclear, Evelyn felt certain, unshakably, that this was Margot. The music stopped. The figure turned and vanished. But Evelyn didn't feel abandoned. Only that something had been offered. Not an answer, exactly, but an opening. When she returned to her room, the notebook was no longer by her pillow. It lay on the floor as if placed there. A new line written in slanted hand. She's still looking for the quiet place. The phrase echoed in her mind. She's still looking for the quiet place. What did it mean to be quiet, not just in volume, but in being? Evelyn thought of her mother humming in the kitchen, Margot's letters fading into disjointed whispers, and the house itself, always just on the verge of speaking. The day passed in a hush, as if the walls knew to listen. Evelyn didn't speak aloud. She didn't even hum. She moved from room to room like a guest trying not to disturb the host. She returned to the attic in the early afternoon. The mirror still stood there, unmoved, undisturbed, but charged with an energy that made her pulse rise. She brought a sheet this time and draped it over the glass, not out of fear, but reverence. Not everything was meant to be seen at once. In the far corner, beneath a pile of old tapestries, she found a wooden box with initials carved faintly into the lid M. Margot Winthrop? The box contained a journal. It began on the first page. July 9th, 1950. This house listens. Not always kindly, but always closely. Evelyn read page after page. Margot had been a boarder here, a cousin, taken in after her parents died. She was quiet, thoughtful, and drawn to silence like a moth to still water. She had loved the sound of the piano, the smell of lavender, and Evelyn's mother, then just a girl, had been her only companion. But somewhere in the entries, a shift occurred. August 3rd. The footsteps have begun. I thought I imagined them. But then Celia heard them too. She said they come only when I play the third note in the lullaby. The one that lingers, Celia. That was her mother's name. The entries became frantic, the writing denser, crossing margins, words piling over each other. I see myself in the mirror before I walk past it. and she sees me too. She doesn't want to frighten me, but she doesn't know where to go. And I think I've opened the door." The final entry stopped mid-sentence. Evelyn closed the journal slowly, her fingertips numb. She descended from the attic, the silence thick around her now, like breath held for too long. That night, the house shifted again, not in sound, in weight. The floor beneath her bedroom creaked long after she lay down, though no one was moving. The air pressed close. The clock didn't chime. It exhaled. At 3:12, as if scripted, the notebook slid from the knitstand onto the floor. She turned on the lamp. A new line had appeared. "The mirror remembers, but it won't show unless you ask without fear." Evelyn dressed, pulled her sweater close, and climbed to the attic once more. The mirror stood where she'd left it, the sheet still covering it like a shroud. She paused. The memory of Margot's reflection, blinking first, haunted her less now than it had before. She realized Margot hadn't meant to frighten her. She had been waiting, watching, perhaps, for someone who could finish what she began. Evelyn pulled away the sheet. Her reflection met her eyes. She didn't blink. Slowly she stepped forward. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. The surface shimmered. Not visibly, no Hollywood effect, no swirl of light, but subtly. The feeling in the room shifted as if gravity itself had softened. Behind her reflection, something emerged. A second figure, a woman with dark pinned hair, pale dress, standing just to the side. Her face held no menace, only exhaustion and hope. Evelyn turned. No one behind her, only in the mirror. Margot lifted a hand, not reaching, just acknowledging. Evelyn didn't raise hers. She only whispered, "What do you need?" In the next blink, the mirror showed only Evelyn again. But something inside her settled, like a puzzle piece finally in place. She returned to her room in silence. The notebook now read, "The quiet place is where I was left. She'll find me there. The quiet place is where I was left." Evelyn lay awake long after reading the message, staring at the ceiling as if the plaster held answers. That line, it wasn't a riddle. It was a direction. A memory someone couldn't speak aloud but needed to show. The next morning, clouds hung low over the house. The kind of sky that holds its breath before a storm. Evelyn dressed with purpose, pulling on boots and her mother's old raincoat from the hall closet. She felt drawn toward the woods behind the house, an area she hadn't explored since she was a child. She remembered the trail vaguely, the narrow path that cut through trees, leading to a clearing her mother used to call the prayer field. It had always been still there, still and oddly sad. The air was damp with coming rain. Branches arched overhead like a cathedral, leaves whispering their secrets as she passed. Evelyn didn't rush. She listened, to wind, to steps, to the way her own breath felt different in this part of the world. She reached the clearing and stopped. It was smaller than she remembered, more overgrown, but the center remained untouched, flat earth in a circle surrounded by stones. Some of the stones had carvings, not names, symbols, spirals, eyes, flowers with too many petals. In the center stood a bench, weathered and moss-covered, and there upon it sat a small music box. She didn't recognize it. It looked handmade, carved with vines and stars. She knelt beside it and opened the lid. The melody was familiar, simple, slow. The lullaby. 3 notes in, the air changed. A breeze swept through the clearing, though the trees didn't move. The silence thickened. Evelyn stood, box in hand, and turned slowly. The world was still, but she wasn't alone. By the trees stood Margot, or the memory of her. The shape shimmered, not like mist, but like sorrow, deep and quiet. Margot didn't speak. She simply looked at the bench. Evelyn followed the gaze. There, where the music box had been, now lay a ribbon, soft blue, frayed at the ends. She picked it up, and suddenly the trees seemed to pull back, revealing something behind them, a stone door. Not real, not solid, but visible. Just for a moment. A hush fell, like the air itself was holding its breath. Margot stepped toward it, slowly, and Evelyn understood this was a quiet place. Not a room, not a destination, a moment, a letting go. She watched as Margot passed through the image of the door. It didn't open. It didn't need to. She simply became part of it, faded into the stillness. When it was done, the ribbon fell from Evelyn's hand. The music box wound down, and the clearing suddenly felt ordinary again. But not empty, just complete. Evelyn sat on the bench for a long while. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just let herself feel what it meant to witness someone being remembered. As she walked back through the woods, the rain finally came. Gentle, cleansing. It soaked the leaves, the coat, her hair, but it didn't touch the notebook she carried with her, tucked close to her chest. Back at the house, the fire had gone out in the hearth, though she didn't remember lighting it. The room was warm anyway, the kind of warmth that came from peace, not heat. The notebook lay open on her bed. No new writing. Just the last line again. She'll find me there. Only this time it was crossed out, and beneath it a new sentence had been added. Thank you for hearing me. The house felt different now. Not lighter, not brighter, but quieter, in a truer sense. As if something had stopped pacing just beyond the walls. As if a breath had finally been released. Evelyn moved through it differently, too. No longer flinching at creaks or shadows. They were still there, of course they were, but no longer felt like warnings. Just echoes, traces. The kind a home holds when it has known love, sorrow, and time. She placed a music box on the mantel, next to the photograph of her mother in her garden apron. The ribbon she kept in the drawer beside her bed, wrapped carefully in lavender tissue. And the notebook, now filled with messages and silence alike, remained open on her writing desk, just in case. That night, for the first time, she dreamed. Not of footsteps, not of mirrors, but of Margot. They sat together on the garden bench, the same one from her childhood. The lavender bloomed, thick and fragrant, and a warm dusk surrounded them like a blanket. Margot didn't speak. She simply rested her hand over Evelyn's, and when Evelyn woke, the air still carried the faint scent of lavender. Later that day, while going through the old study again, Evelyn found a drawer she hadn't opened before. The key was still in the lock, and inside lay letters, this time written by her mother. The top envelope was addressed to C. She unfolded the paper gently. Dear Celia, it began. But Evelyn paused. Her mother's name was Celia. She looked again. No, this letter wasn't written by her mother. It was written to her mother by Margot. The letter was dated August 15th, 1951. Dear Celia, I know you hear them now too. It wasn't just me. You opened the same door I did. But you were braver. You turned away. You lived. The rest of the letter was more intimate, more difficult. Confessions of loneliness, confusion, and guilt. It was clear Margot had loved her mother, not just as a friend or companion. There were layers to it, unspoken but felt. And perhaps it was too much. Perhaps it had nowhere to go. And so it stayed. Until Evelyn came back. She placed the letter gently beside the journal in the wooden box, closed the lid, and slid it back onto the shelf. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. That evening, a soft knock sounded at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, the porch was empty. But on the welcome mat, a single white lily had been placed. Evelyn picked it up slowly, heart tightening not in fear, but in awe. Some things she thought never truly leave. That night, no message appeared in the notebook. Instead, when she opened it, a pressed lily had already been placed between the pages. The message this time was short. She remembers now. And then beneath it, what will you choose to remember? Evelyn stared at the page, then turned to look out the window. The garden had started to bloom again. It was time, not to leave the house, not yet, but to begin asking different questions. Not who is haunting me, but what do I carry forward? There was a stillness in Evelyn now, not the heavy kind that comes with fear, but the kind that arrives after clarity, a quiet after the thunder. The house didn't demand from her anymore. It simply offered space. And that space, oddly enough, made room for questions. Who else had known? What had her mother left unsaid, unwritten? And more pressing still, why had Evelyn been the one to return? She began sorting the attic with intention, no longer just a guest poking through memories, but a steward. As she sifted through trunks and yellowed envelopes, she came across a box marked with faded ink, to be burned. She hesitated. Inside were notebooks older than Margot's, by the look of them. The first bore her grandfather's name, John Emery. He died before she was born. A quiet man, according to family lore. Distant, formal, always watching, rarely speaking. But his handwriting was steady, purposeful. The entries began in 1945. The mirror is older than this house. It came from the convent, gifted to Celia's mother by the last caretaker. Said to reflect more than the face. I thought it nonsense. Evelyn blinked. The mirror. The same one Margot had written about. The one Evelyn had stood before, watched, waited beside. She read further. Margot saw something. I believe her now. Celia plays the lullaby, and the mirror shifts. There are echoes here, not of the past, but of the undone. Things left behind. I fear we've made a passage where none was meant. The entries continued, some long, some fragmented. He described seeing Margot in the hallway after she'd supposedly gone to live with relatives. Doors opening on their own. Songs heard when no one was near the piano. One line chilled her more than the rest. The footsteps are not hers. Margot followed them, but she wasn't the first. Evelyn closed the book slowly. What did that mean? Was there something before Margot? She flipped to the back cover. A torn note had been tucked there. "Celia, if you find this, forgive me. I buried what I shouldn't have. I tried to protect you both." "Both?" Evelyn looked again at the handwriting. The loops. The tension in the strokes. Her grandfather hadn't just been afraid. He'd been guilty. She took the note to the garden, lit a match, and burned it as the label on the box had instructed. Ash floated up, delicate and aimless. That night the wind rose. The windows rattled softly, and the house seemed hung, not angry, not warning, just stirring. At 3:12 no message appeared, but she woke anyway, not to noise, to warmth. At the foot of the bed, the notebook lay open, blank. Yet something had changed. The air smelled faintly of violets, and Evelyn felt it a presence different than Margot. Older, less distinct. A pressure behind the veil, not pushing, only waiting. She whispered into the room, "Who else is here?" No answer came, but the corner of the mirror in the attic fogged over, though no one was near it. She rose from bed and made her way up, the lantern casting soft golden arcs across the walls. The attic was calm, still, but the mirror now bore a single word written in the condensation. Before. Evelyn placed her hand against the glass. It was cold, then warm, then gone. The word haunted her. Before. It felt more like a key than a clue, something to be turned, not just pondered. Evelyn stood in the attic long after the fog on the mirror had faded, hand still resting against the cool glass, trying to feel what lay beneath the surface. If Margot wasn't the first, then who was? The next morning, Evelyn returned to the cellar, drawn not by any sound, but by a pressure, a subtle pull in her chest. The air was always cooler there, tinged with the scent of damp stone and old iron. Shadows didn't stretch in this room. They settled. In the back corner, behind shelves of mason jars filled with discolored preserves, she found a panel in the wall slightly askew. A hidden door, not locked, not concealed cleverly, just forgotten. Inside a crawl space. She hesitated, then crouched and crawled in, brushing away cobwebs with trembling fingers. The space opened to a hollow square, dirt-floored, untouched. In the center sat a child's chair, and resting on it a small leather satchel. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside were papers, drawings, not words, crude, frantic sketches in charcoal, dozens of them. Eyes, always eyes, some wide with fear, others weeping. One page, however, stood out, a figure, unmistakably a young girl, standing alone in a hallway, and behind her, a long corridor of figures without faces. The drawing was signed, a Winthrop, 1886. Winthrop. The family line stretched further than she'd thought. She returned to the study, digging through the genealogical records her mother once compiled. In a bound ledger, handwritten in looping cursive, she found it. Amelia Winthrop, born 1874. Died. Notes. Vanished, presumed dead, 1887. Age 13. Only child of Joseph and Edith Winthrop, residents of the original estate before its renovation in 1910. So Margot hadn't opened the door. She'd stepped through one already opened by Amelia. Back in her room, Evelyn spread the drawings across the bed. The notebook remained blank, though she left it open. At 3:12, nothing stirred, until the mirror called again. She returned to the attic. This time, no sheet. She stood before the mirror and didn't ask for anything. She only waited. The glass flickered, not with movement, but memory. A hallway appeared, and then Amelia. She stood barefoot on a wooden floor, wearing a nightdress, clutching a doll missing one eye. Her expression was not fearful, only lost. As if she had waited so long, she no longer knew what to expect. Evelyn raised a hand. The girl did not mimic her. Instead, Amelia turned and walked down the mirrored corridor. And Evelyn saw something horrifying in its quietness, how long the hallway was, how many doors it held, how many others might be inside. The image faded. Back in her room, the notebook had a new message. She didn't mean to open it. She only wanted to see her mother again. Evelyn whispered, "Did she?" The pages fluttered, then stilled. At the very bottom of the next page, a sentence scrawled itself faintly. No. The sadness in that one word, no, was unlike anything Evelyn had felt before. It wasn't despair. It wasn't anger. It was the kind of quiet grief that settles in the bones generations deep. The ache of someone lost, and not just to time, but to forgetting. Amelia hadn't been trying to open a door to the dead. She had only wanted to reach the living. Evelyn spent the following days unraveling the history that had been quietly layered into the house. Not through books, those had long since faded or misled, through objects, textures, dust lines, the way certain rooms always pulled colder, or how a locked drawer would creak open without force. The house was like a layered melody, and Evelyn was finally hearing the low notes. In the parlor, behind the old grandfather clock, she found a set of bricks different from the rest, darker, smoother, set without mortar. She pressed one gently, and it gave way. A compartment opened. Inside was a journal, smaller than the others, fabric-bound, childlike. Amelia's. The entries were innocent at first. Observations about birds. Her father's stern quiet. Her mother's forgetfulness. But then came the shift. I saw the woman again today. Not mother. Someone else. She cries when I look at her. Evelyn turned the pages, heart quickening. The mirror shows me people who aren't here. I asked Father, and he told me never to speak of it again. Then later, I thought if I stepped inside I might find her. She called me sweet girl. She looked like mother, but her eyes were wrong. The last entry was a single sentence. It's not a door. It's a mouth. Evelyn shut the journal gently and stared out the window. The sky had turned the color of pewter, soft and heavy, holding the weight of dusk. What if the house wasn't haunted? What if it was the haunting? A space that remembered too much. A mouth, as Amelia had written one, that opened for grief and never fully closed. She sat before the mirror that night, not in search of vision, but of witness. She placed the journal beside her. She whispered, "I see her now," and for the first time, the mirror remained still. No flicker, no figures, just Evelyn's own reflection, tired, tearful, but grounded. The notebook hours later received only one line, "Then she can rest." Evelyn didn't write back. She closed the book, wrapped the drawings and journal in soft cloth, and placed them in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. She wasn't trying to end something anymore. She was trying to hold it. And somehow that made the silence in the house different. Not hollow, not ominous, just present. That night, the grandfather clock ticked slower, and the footsteps, if they came, were too soft to wake her. Evelyn's days began to blend into a gentle rhythm, dawn's soft light spilling through the curtains, the house waking with whispered creaks and sighs, and the steady pulse of her own breathing filling the quiet spaces. She no longer sought answers, nor did she fear the shadows that stretched along the hallway floor. Instead, she learned to listen to the house, to the stories folded into its walls, and most of all, to herself. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old photographs, Evelyn paused over an image she hadn't seen before. It was sepia-toned, worn at the edges, showing a group of women standing outside the house. Among them, a young girl with a serious face, clutching a doll missing one eye, Amelia. But there was another figure, faint, almost transparent, a woman standing just behind Amelia, her expression soft but somber. Margot. A chill ran through Evelyn, not from fear, but from the quiet presence the photo carried. She traced the edges with her finger, feeling the weight of years pressing gently against the paper. That evening, she set the photograph beside the notebook and spoke aloud. "Are you still here?" The notebook's pages fluttered as if caught in a breeze. Then words appeared. "We never left." Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The house, the footsteps, the voices, they were not restless spirits trying to escape, but threads woven into the fabric of a family's memory. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, where lavender bloomed again under the moonlight. The air smelled sweet and calm. As she turned away, a soft sound followed her steps. Footsteps. But they were different, now steady, slow, familiar. A reminder that some stories do not end in silence. They live quietly, carried forward by those willing to remember. The days folded softly into one another, the house settling into a gentle breath of its own. Evelyn moved through its rooms not as a visitor, but as part of its pulse, a thread woven into its endless story. On a late afternoon, while dusting the old bookshelf in the study, her hand brushed against a small, hidden compartment she hadn't noticed before. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, tarnished by time but still warm to the touch. She opened it gently. Inside was a faded photograph, two young women, smiling softly, arms linked, as if sharing a secret only they knew. Margot and Celia. Evelyn clasped the locket around her neck, feeling the cool metal settle against her skin. The house whispered around her, not with voices or footsteps, but with a feeling. A promise kept. She walked through the garden as twilight deepened, the lavender swaying in the soft breeze. The footsteps that had once stirred her fear now felt like footsteps home steady, sure, and full of gentle welcome. Evelyn paused by the old bench, breathing in the night air. The day had done all it needed to do. Now only stillness remained. Let your thoughts loosen, like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase. Just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story. The house no longer felt like a place caught between worlds. Instead, it had become a sanctuary, a quiet reminder that memories, like footsteps, linger softly in the spaces we call home. Evelyn understood now that the echoes she had followed were not warnings or hauntings, but gentle invitations to remember those who came before. In the stillness, she found peace, a connection stretching through time and silence. And as the night wrapped itself around the world, she let the quiet settle deep within her, allowing the past and present to coexist in a calm embrace. Sometimes the truest comfort comes not from forgetting, but from embracing the stories whispered in the empty halls and letting them lead us softly into rest.